Here's an example of what the painterly effect is going to look like on your picture. Really quickly, there's a good amount of layers that you're going to be working with. So as I go through and hide these, you can see how each layer has more and more detail as I go through them. So this first one is the most detailed layer, so we'll add that one last. And then this one has a little bit more detail. This one I'm adding back in some of the browns in the hair, and then this layer has the most detail on it. So when I take that away, this is what the first step is going to look like, and I can get rid of that black background as well. But this is what the first step is going to look like, so it's nothing too detailed yet, so don't focus on details of the eyes or nose or lips or anything too specific. Focus on just the general color and value changes as we go with this first layer. But I'm going to hide that, so go ahead and get your image open that you want to be working with and add a new layer. So I'm going to call this layer background. So on this new layer, I'm going to grab my eyedropper tool. So the eyedropper tool is on the left here, and this is what will allow you to select specific colors to be working with. So I'm just going to grab a color from the cheek, and then if you hit B on your keyboard, it will bring up the brush tool. And with that brush tool, now my color is that skin color that I grabbed from the cheek over here. So I'm able to start painting in different areas that color, for the most part, is located. If you want to change the size of your brush or make it bigger and smaller, remember that shortcut is underneath the delete button, those two brackets. So I'm going to make that brush a little bit bigger because, again, I'm not too focused yet on detail. So as I'm painting, you'll know when to stop adding that specific color and choose a new one when it starts to become obvious where that color starts and stops. So if you notice when I was first painting, you can't really tell that I'm adding that paint to it yet until I start to get into areas that color generally is not. So that's a pretty big section here that I'll just fill with that first color. Then I'm going to hit I on my keyboard, and that will automatically pull up the eyedropper. I'm going to click in another area to select a new skin color, and then hit B on the keyboard to select the brush again. So then I'll just go through and paint until that skin color becomes obvious that I need to switch. So over here it's super noticeable. So I'm going to hit I, grab another area, B for my brush, and continue painting. So as you go through this step, you don't really have to choose too small of areas. It depends on how detailed you want to be. You can use pretty generalized colors and still have this work out well. So don't worry too much about being overly detailed unless you want to really take your time and have a very detailed painting. So it just depends on what you're going for. But remember, as we go through these layers, they're going to become more detailed, so you'll eventually be adding more and more to it. So go ahead and just go through all of these areas and use that brush to add the color. When you get to the hair, again, don't worry too much about detail. I'm just going to generally brush most of this a similar color, because as I add more details on additional layers, that's when I can bring the texture of the hair back. So don't worry too much about losing the texture. Just try to brush the colors in the general direction that the lines are headed in the hair. So it's kind of coming down this way and then coming off to the side. But I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of this, and then we'll come back to looking at how to blend the colors together. So you'll notice as you look at this, it's not super detailed. I painted right over the eye with a skin color because you'll want that skin color in the background versus black in the background. So you can see I just did the eyedropper next to the eye, took the brush and just painted right over that. So you'll come back for additional detail. With the lips, you could almost do the same thing. I just took a little bit of the pink and red from the background. Now that all of these sections are filled in, we're going to blend them together so that it looks more like a painting style. So to do that, find where the paintbrush tool is, and then you're going to click and hold it down to find the additional options underneath, and choose the mixer brush tool. So I'm going to click on the mixer brush tool, uncheck this first box here. That way it's going to clean off your paintbrush every time you go to change it or work with it. So again, leave that first box unchecked. Everything else you can leave how it is, but keep in mind that If you wanted to play around with those settings, you could. It's just going to affect the way that the colors blend with each other. So if you wanted a brush that has more water, that's obviously going to blend the color a lot more, just like you would if you're mixing paint and you add more water to that paintbrush. So you can play around with some of those, but in general you can keep it how it is. I'm going to adjust that brush a little bit bigger, and then I'm just going to, with the tablet, start blending these together, trying to keep the direction of the lines consistent with the form of the face. So instead of just scribbling up and down, I'm trying to follow that curve of the cheek, and I'm going to come along and try to blend this in. So you'll want to take your time and try to, again, follow those directional lines within the face here. So when I get to the lips, same thing, I'm just going to blend those. The nose, I'm not going to over blend too much. We'll come back in and do detail there. And same with if you have any darker areas around the eye, try to leave that mostly that lighter value. And then the hair, I'm going to try to blend again out towards the right to keep that direction of the hair consistent with the direction of those lines that would be underneath. I'm just going through, filling all that in and blending it. So I will finish blending this, and then we'll come back to the next step to start adding more detail. So here's everything blended in. What I'm going to do next is this next detail layer. So this is what my next layer would look like. But to do this, go ahead and add a new layer on top of the last one you were working with. And then switch back to the regular paintbrush. So I'm clicking and holding down the mixer brush to choose the regular brush tool. And then I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can get a little more detailed. I'm going to hide that last layer I was working with so that I can see the background image. I'm going to use a very small brush so I can get that detail added. And then here I'm going to do something similar to what I started with, where I'm using the eyedropper tool to grab color from the background, switching to the brush tool to go in and add that detail. So here's the eye, for example. I'm just going to take this darker color and start adding the detail of those eyelashes. I'm going to get a darker black for those eyelashes. Add detail. Switch eye. Eyedropper. Touch up a little cheek texture for the face blended. This eye I have a as adding a layer underneath my drawing. So underneath all of my drawings here, but above this one. So above the base coat. And I just painted that with the black paintbrush to fill in the background. But when you're finished, you could save this. Remember, the more layers you have, the more detail that you'll be able to add. So I definitely keep working on adding layers, finding areas that you can go back and add some detail. If you wanted to, you could even take this detailed layer, maybe go back over it with your mixer brush so that you're able to really just blend some of those areas a little bit more if you feel like it stands out too much as being textured with the paintbrush. So completely up to you how